Hopefully you buckled up for that because we are now recording. So, hi, my name is Jessica. Thank you for spending Juneteenth with me today. I like to think of this as kind of a day on of service on Independence Day, so thank you very much. For the series, because this is the first of many, we're going to be talking about a lot of different topics, but very specifically and kind of in a deep dive for each of the specifics, instead of what I call kind of the rock skipping method, where you kind of just gently touch on a couple of things and hope you figure it out. I don't really like that method because I don't find it effective. I think it's important to really start and do kind of a deep dive. There is no homework or prerequisites required except for you understanding your own lived experience. That is the best tool I believe we all have anyway. So, welcome very much to the conversation. But in light of everything that has been going on with COVID and or Black Lives Matter, today being Juneteenth, what is happening next? It's an election year. I don't know if anybody even remembers the Australian wildfires, but it's been a fascinating year. And so I thought, kind of as a introduction to either my style or kind of how we're going, I wanted to give you an opportunity to see what I mean when I start talking about like self-reflective work. It's interesting on kind of a Zoom space to what it means to create a safe space, etc., etc. So for today's activity, we're going to be doing a prompt process that I created to use through a number of different social identity lenses. But today, we're actually going to do something that I tweaked it when we were all began social distancing to really talk about coping with the unknown. Uh, some of us are quite good at this. Some of us have never done this. Some of us have done this at different times in our lives. But it's a really great kind of reckoning of what's happening right now, while also giving you space to kind of practice using your own life as a tool. So I have said a couple of times, and I will say it one more time, especially if you're watching the recording, you're going to need a pen and paper for this activity. I super promise. Now, the bonus is you're not going to fax this sheet of paper to anybody. You're really just kind of leaving notes for yourself as we go through the activity or through the different prompts. But I want to make sure that you have pen and paper. Most of today, this may seem like a strange webinar, but most of today is actually you on mute in silence. I'll have a timer, as I'm going to give you a series of prompts, and as you are reflecting on your own life, you're doing that on your own in your own space. So again, you don't have to share anything that comes up with today. I just want you to practice like reflecting and paying attention to your own life and how you got here. And I am a trained professional, so I will be facilitating the process through that. So that's really kind of the plan for the day. Any thoughts or comments or anything? Looks like a negator. Okay, great. Along the way and or later, if you have any thoughts or comments, you're welcome to jot down my cell phone number. This is actually a Google Voice number, but you can text message me any questions or comments or anything that you have or need. I'm happy to be of service while we're working together or after. The texting number is 202-670-4262. You can text message me any question, comment along the way. I'm happy to help or do whatever I can, especially those watching the recording. This applies to you as well. So, again, I believe self-reflection is kind of step one of doing any diversity or social justice work. So with this particular activity, we're going to be talking about like messages you've learned about yourself and others, how those impact your behaviors, what that means around self-learning, and also having some authentic conversations about the process of doing self-reflective work. So one last time, you're going to need pen and paper for this activity. Okay, let's see if everybody has them. So with your sheet of paper, you're going to be moving through 4 prompts. So I'm going to ask you to take your sheet of paper and divide it into 4 sections. So you can draw a plus sign or an X on your sheet of paper. You don't need a ruler. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then you're going to number those 1, 2, 3, and 4. So once you have your paper divided, 1, 2, 3, and 4, just give me a thumbs up. Those of it that I can see. You don't even have to have your video on for this if you don't want to. It's totally fine. I think staring at yourself can be kind of exhausting, and I really worry about it fueling any like baby seeds of narcissism we had to begin with. So feel free to turn your video off if you need to. We'll go through the 4 prompts and then we'll open it back up for conversation. So you do you, take care of yourself. I know I'm not actually your boss, but at least for the next 45 minutes, I kind of am, sort of, a little. So for quadrant 1, we're going to start on this process. I have a timer. So I'm going to give you very specific prompts. And then what you do in the quadrant is record messages you've learned. Now, what do I mean by that? So I might give you a prompt and you might get sent back to 4th grade. Great, that's something that happened in your life. You might get sent back to 2 hours ago. Great, that's something that happened in your life. What I want you to do is record messages that you have learned from any point in time in your life inside that quadrant. Now, we don't have time for a dissertation, so I just call it like breadcrumbs or draw pictures or just keywords. You're just leaving notes for yourself about the conversation you are having with yourself about the prompt. And then you're putting the notes down to kind of document the conversation that you're having. And again, you don't have to share this with anyone. 1, you're at work. 2, we're not all in the same room. And 3, it's super personal, private information. So you're just having a conversation with yourself. Deal? Deal. Great. So prompt number 1 is when the lens we are using for this is coping with the unknown. So what I want you to do is to have a raucous conversation with yourself about anything that you have learned throughout your life and your experience about how do you cope with the unknown. How's that going? Where did you learn how that is going? What are the good sides or the bad sides? Has this been a pattern throughout your life? Is this a brand new thing you've never done? There are no wrong answers. I just want you to record whatever it is that comes to mind, and I'm going to give you about 3 minutes for this section. Whoa, you do not need an hour for sure. Fix my timer, sorry. So I'm going to give you about 3 minutes, and I'm going to mute myself so then y'all can just in quiet reflect on your life. Messages you've learned about coping with the unknown through your own lens. You have roughly about a minute left. For Anu, I've given you directions in the chat, so you should be all caught up. No worries. Okay, as quadrant 1 kind of comes to a close, again, I want to just remind you that you're just having a conversation with yourself. So any messages that you've learned while coping with the unknown, quadrant 1 is messages you've learned from yourself coping with the unknown. Totally great. You can come back to this section at any time because some of the other prompts may make you think of more things in that section, but I promise you're doing it correctly. So we're going to move on to quadrant number 2. So quadrant number 2 is messages you have learned about coping with the unknown from other people than you. So thinking about other people and how they are coping with the unknown, what are you learning about from them? Any answer is correct. You're just going to leave little breadcrumbs or draw pictures or keywords or whatever comes up in the raucous conversation you're going to have with yourself over the next 3 minutes. I'll set a timer. I'll mute myself. You record it on paper, and I'll be right back. I also leave the prompts in the chat too, just in case you need to look at it. Okay, as we're kind of wrapping up quadrant 2, too many things are going off on my side of the world. As we are wrapping up quadrant two, you just had a raucous conversation with yourself and you left yourself some notes. Now, what's interesting is that I originally created this process when we started talking about social identities. I mentioned that at the start. So, whether we're talking about gender or race or sexual orientation, etc., what I noticed is there was this pattern specifically there, but it also happens when I tweaked this when we all started sheltering in place about COVID-19 and coping with the unknown. And that is that quadrant two tends to be very extreme things. That tends to be, there's almost always this pattern. Maybe there's more than two, but there's very obvious things. So, what ends up showing with coping up the unknown is in quadrant two is kind of the person on Instagram that's going to come out of this social distancing with like abs of steel and seven languages and knows how to make bread and is learning how to do Sanskrit with some twig that they picked up from their backyard. Like these overachieving, very high, super productive people that I cannot really relate to. That tends to show up something like that. And then there's the other side, which is like your Uncle Tom who hasn't gotten off the couch and finished Netflix. They've been home for 4 months and have done nothing. And you're like, "Ooh, I brushed my teeth this week. I'm doing better than Uncle Tom." So, what ends up happening in quadrant two are these kind of extreme people. But there are tons of different people other than yourself in between there. When I talk about like sexual orientation, for example, if you identify as straight, then in quadrant two, it tends to be gay and lesbian. But we leave out like bisexual or asexual or other folks. If we talk about race, and let's say I identify as a white person, let's say you identify as a person of color, then it might be quadrant one is about being whatever racial identity you have, and then quadrant two is like one other person of color and white. That between those three, usually it's like Hispanic, Latina, black, and white are nailed within the first two quadrants. But there's like tons of other racial identities that don't get talked about, as well as like biracial, multiracial, things like this. So as we move to quadrant three, what I want you to do is to notice who showed up in quadrant two. There is no judgment. You are still doing this great. But who showed up in quadrant two? Because whoever showed up in quadrant two is who you show up first. That's like who you reflect on first. Fantastic. That's really good information. So as we move to quadrant three, what I want you to do is messages you have learned from even more people other than yourself that didn't show up in quadrant two, but have now space to show up. We live in a very binary world, so it's us and some very easy, accessible thems. And the reality is that things can be more complicated than that. So when talking about coping with the unknown, there's the Instagram person who like nailed it with some kind of cupcake that looks like a unicorn, and there's some like sloth like thing that I feel way more productive of than. But then there's the people in the middle that are kind of like on a roller coaster and struggling with this part but doing pretty good with this part. So messages that you have learned about coping with the unknown from even yet more people than yourself. That's quadrant three. My mouse is being extra sensitive today. So, quadrant three, messages you've learned about even more people other than you and how they cope with the unknown. And I'll give you about 3 minutes. Just under a minute left. Okay, while we're coming to a close on quadrant 3, before I move into quadrant 4, I just want to invite you to recollect that you're just having a conversation with yourself about all the messages you've learned across your own life. That sounds great. As we move into quadrant 4, there's a possibility that some definitions or something, and I'll give some specific examples, need to take place. So I'm happy to do that. So quadrant 4 is messages that you've learned from times where you colluded or participated in a silence or marginalizing act. So what does this mean? Let me tell you. So collusion means that you didn't do the bad thing, but you didn't stop the bad thing. And participating means that you actively did the bad thing. Now, what do I mean by bad thing? What is interesting in the patterns that are coming up with coping with the unknown is you can collude and participate against other people, and you can collude and participate even against yourself. So you get to record whatever messages you have learned from your own behaviors. Now, some examples. So, for example, I have been sober for 17 years. Woohoo! So it took me a very long time to understand that I was an alcoholic because my grandfather was often caught drunk riding his horse through town. I'm from Texas. Riding his horse naked on his horse through town and firing his gun in the air. I have never been that drunk, ever to be naked on a horse with a gun. That has never happened. So I used to think that I was never an alcoholic, right? So similar to quadrant 2 and quadrant 3, I had this kind of check of myself. So then I just didn't really understand what I was actually doing was also called alcoholism. I just have never done that. When we start talking about colluding and participating, it takes kind of that same meta conversation with yourself. So let's take, for example, Jamal. Jamal, as part of coping with the unknown, has made a commitment to doing yoga every day at 3 o'clock. Well, that is fantastic. We're very proud of Jamal. But what ends up happening, whether we like it or not, and it's maternity leave or coping with the unknown while we're sheltering in place, doesn't matter. Same thing happens. We're super excited about it until it becomes annoying. And when it becomes annoying, what happens is let's say you had to put together a planning meeting and the only time that works is 3 o'clock. And you'll eventually, whether you know it or not, someone will be like, well, we can't do it at 3 o'clock because Jamal has yoga. It's even worse if you know Jamal is not doing yoga at 3 o'clock, and yet you are still trying to honor this commitment that he has fakely made to himself. So you get snarfy, right? You get about it. So if you're the person saying well, we can't do anything, then you're participating in a silent and marginalizing act as Jamal is trying to cope with the unknown. If you just kind of go along with it and you don't call that person out on their snarfy attitude, you're colluding. So that's external, but it also happens internally. For example, I told my shrink that I need to get outside. It'll be good for my anxiety. It'll be good for focus. I should get out of this chair. That should happen. I have 3 dogs that would love to go on a walk. So I told my shrink 2 months ago that I was going to take each dog on their own independent walk every day. I don't even walk the 3 dogs every day, but I made this thing. This is what I was going to do. Have I done this yet once? Nope, haven't done it at all. When I have a break in between things, there's a little voice in the back of my head. She's very quiet. I'll be like, you should go on one of those dog walks right now. And what will end up happening is that my inside voices, sometimes my outside voice, because I'm an external processor, will go, oh no, I don't have time for a dog walk. I mean, it could rain, or I like my socks and I'd have to put on shoes, or no, I don't think so. I'm going to do this instead, right? So I can actively collude and actively participate against my own plan of what I have set up when coping with the unknown. So, what I want you to do in quadrant 4 is to have a raucous conversation with yourself. This is about you and your behaviors. In just the context of coping with the unknown, how have you colluded or participated in silencing, marginalizing, getting in the way, devaluing, whatever, some method of coping with the unknown for yourself or for other people? That's what I want you to record in quadrant 4. And a reminder, you're not going to fax this sheet of paper to anyone. You're just having a conversation with yourself. So, what have you done, and what messages have you learned from what you have done about colluding or participating in a silencing or marginalizing act? I'll give you 3 minutes so we have good for time. We have just under a minute left. As you finish up, please feel free to turn your sheet of paper over. If you're using a cute little journal, you're going to need another sheet of paper. While we're waiting on a couple other people to kind of finish, I would also encourage some of you, I don't know, I'm just meeting all of you. Hello, first date. And so some of you, I don't know what your names are. So I'm not necessarily going to call on you, but it'd be nice to know what your name is. So in the top right corner, I think I'm mirrored. So I think I'm pointing to the right for y'all. There's 3 little dots, and if you click on those 3 little dots, you can change your name or what shows up on the screen, so that I know your name. If you don't already have that, that'd be great. Wonderful. Okay, so I'm now assuming that everybody has flipped their sheet of paper over. The main reason I want to do that is because often, even in an in-person workshop, You've just gone through messages you have learned in your life. And we've all been to a bad diversity training. And so I just want to honor that, like, number one, I really am not going to ask you to fax that to anybody. But while also flipping it over, I want to make sure that you know that any discussion that we're about to have is not necessarily about what is on the other side of your sheet of paper. It'll be about what's coming next. And part of this, again, is about your raucous conversation with yourself. So if you turn your sheet of paper over or you have a new sheet of paper, I want you to also divide it into 4 quadrants. And according to my shrink, take a deep breath. It'll save you a copay. Just breathe in and breathe back out. Again, if you have any thoughts or comments, you're welcome to text message at 202-670-4262. On your fresh sheet of paper, you're going to divide it into 4 quadrants again. Then in those 4 quadrants, we're going to label it easy, hard, next, and promise. Easy, hard, next, and promise. If you ever facilitate a workshop, this is a really great discussion thing. You're welcome to steal it. So what I want you to do is in the first 2 quadrants, easy and hard, is I just want you to think, how you doing right now? What has come easy to you? What has come hard to you? Do I mean about this activity? Sure. Do I mean about this week at work? Sure. Do I mean this week at home? Yeah. Do I mean since birth to now? Sure. Whatever. I don't care. You're having a conversation with yourself. So what has been easy and what has been hard? Just leave some notes for yourself about what has been very easy for you to do and what has been very hard for you to do. Perhaps there are some pretty obvious answers there. Maybe there's not. I don't know. And then we'll move to next and promise in just a second. But I want to give you just a chance to record what has been easy and what has been hard. Okay, next up is next and promise. So sometimes kind of being reflective with yourself is an old habit, and sometimes it's a brand new, well, sorry. I found this phone on the dog walk yesterday, and they are now trying to find it, and I didn't even know that the ringer was on because I can't break into the phone. Apologize. So they're doing all kinds of things to it, like they're looking for it. So I'll be with them in a second. Next and promise. Forgot what I was talking about. So for some people, we self-reflect all the time. For other times, this is like the quietest self-reflection time we've had, and it's called work. That's amazing. So what I need you to do is to recognize that for some, being self-reflective all of a sudden comes up with a to-do list. So first off, chill out. If specifically while we're social distancing, there are probably things on your to-do list that you weren't doing before because you didn't think you have any time. Now, in theory, we have time, except we don't have time because we're not going to do that activity. Just let it go. You're not going to do that activity. I am not sweeping out the carport, and I have no excuses anymore not doing it. You know why? Because it fills up with leaves. It's fine. And the leaves are pretty. I'm good with it. So next and promise, though, may be things that you feel compelled to do. So next is, what are you going to do action-wise? Who are you going to talk to? What are you going to do for yourself? And a promise is you can kind of use this group or this moment to make a proclamation, a promise that you are going to give to yourself or to other people. You don't even have to say it out loud. I just want to give you a chance to proclaim what that might be. When you finish that up, remember to breathe. I usually talk about breathing instead of actually putting in air. And then in the time that we have left, what I thought I would do is see what kind of conversations people might want to have. If we had a little bit more time, usually what I would do is break us into kind of randomly assorted breakout rooms to be able to have a conversation. I'm a little nervous about doing that with only 14 minutes left, and I want to be respectful of your time. So you can use the chat, so you don't actually have to like speak out loud if you don't want to. You don't have to turn your video on. But I'm just curious, we're going to take easy and hard first. But in thinking about easy and hard, what came up for you that has been easy and what has come up for you that has been hard? And usually there's a lot of difference or a very like a full range variety of kind of the context for folks of what has come up easy and what has come up hard. So we can talk about them or you're welcome to put them in the chat.
Jess, do you want us to just talk?
You can talk or you can chat. Sure.
I think for me, what's been the hardest is trying to balance my communication with my partner while I am upstairs working and he is downstairs not working.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm challenged by the fact that his best friend is his phone and that, he's having conversations with, lots of people, which is fine. But it's like, are they now his friends? I'm like not a friend anymore. It's like I don't. It's hard trying to balance that. So I try to go down like at a certain time every day, but in the other quadrants that you were talking about, I don't always get down there at the right time. So I'm a participant in my own activity. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
doing what I said that I was going to do. So I'm trying to figure out how to make sure that I keep that communication like the way it needs to be, and that's like a challenge because I like work. I like to work.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty much it. That's been challenging for me. That's hard for me.
Yeah, that's great. I don't know if this is helpful, but I married someone who is genetically predispositioned for social distancing, so he is loving this. And I am usually surrounded by 1,000 new people every day who are like applauding me and telling me how smart I am. My dogs nor my husband have asked me to write my name in a book for almost 3.5 months now. Like all of my ego is starving. And what I've noticed is talking to the usual suspects doesn't feed that. So then I also have been like chatting and texting and talking to people on the phone of people that I don't even actually know that well, if at all, because I need the newness, right? Anyway, so he really was like, "Why are you talking to people you don't even know? I'm literally sitting in the living room." Um, but it's because I talk to you every day. That's not good, and that's not the kind of partner I want to be, right? So good to know. Okay. Set a Google alert. Okay. What else? What other kind of easy and hards came up? You're welcome to chat them or you can say them out loud.
I guess this feels like admittance, but the things I find easy are the things that I'm most, I guess, ashamed of. It's, feeling frustrated, and I don't like that.
Mm-hmm. If it is helpful, and I'm not a shrink, I was a ceramics major, but I think sometimes being hard on ourselves is a lot easier than like really recognizing something that we're doing that's a struggle. So, Brandy, you and I talked when we were setting up all the dates, but I have enrolled in an MBA program because I don't think I'm getting on a plane for the next year. I haven't taken a class since 1996. And luckily, I had a friend who was reframing when I was talking about how it's all like a video game and I screw up so many times inside the little video game to turn my little bar green that I've memorized all the questions. So eventually I get 100, but I'm not learning anything, right? Like, I'm not learning, I'm playing a video game. And my friend was like, "You're at least learning how to play a video game. Like, if that's what online education is, like, you're at least getting that in. And this is a prerequisite. It's summer school, it's not even one of the MBA classes yet. Like, chill out." But I'm much more likely to talk about how like frustrating this is, and I feel stupid, and I thought I was good at school. Turns out I'm just good at charming a group of people. Like, that's been very easy, like low hanging for me. But the reality is I am actually learning some things. So uh, maybe it's hard to be kind to yourself and easy to acknowledge when you're frustrated. Not to put words in your mouth, but great. So we have one in the chat. It's interesting how many things are both easy and hard. Like, it's both easy and hard to love. It's both easy and hard to listen and take advice. It's so true. Yes, absolutely. People are agreeing with you too. I'm both being a better friend and struggling to be a good friend. Yeah. And I'm curious, and I don't know if it's Lelia, I think. I'm curious if you're a good friend and struggling to be, or if you're, being a better friend and struggling to be a good friend with the same people, or does it vary based on which friend you're talking to?
I think it varies. I think I'm reaching out more generally, like making sure that I'm being a good friend to like the general. And then sometimes with some of the really close ones where they're dealing with a lot of stuff, and I feel like that's just too much, then I withdraw. So um, both better in some ways than I was pre, and then worse in some ways with everything that's going on.
Mm-hmm. Um, I don't know if this is helpful, but this also came up for me too. But I'm looking at my engagement with mostly it's my family, and I don't have that many family members, and I'm not that close with the few that I have, as like what a nice opportunity for like a candlelit meal, and then occasionally on a phone, which it's not a phone, it's a Zoom call. It's like staring into the sun, and I'm like, "Yep, done. Don't have any time for this. I'm not watching any more of your videos. Done, done. Go back to candlelight dinners. Like, what? Like, I needed an appetizer, and like, how you doing? Great. Oh, okay, good. What are you reading? Great. Like, I don't need to know your QAnon stuff, right? So I thought I was a conspiracy theorist, and then I met my brother. But there are other times where staring into the sun, I'd rather do that than go exercise, right? So then I'm like, yes, I'll watch a 4 hour video about how cannibals are taking over the country. That sounds amazing. Let's do that instead of my homework. Yeah. Right. It can, for me at least, it can really vary. And kind of pulling onto Brandy, like, it's a lot easier for me to point out when I'm missing the mark than when I'm not missing the mark. Right. And when you're not missing the mark, you're probably being a pretty good friend. Cool. I'm mystified by the fact that I'm feeling overwhelmed and somehow underwhelmed at the same time. I think that's literally called the unknown. What does that even mean? How is it possible? And it's an odd and unsettling feeling, right? Like free fall. I've described this to my shrink this week as free falling and stuck. Like, I'm free falling inside of a tube that's too small. I don't like any of this. It's a difficult balance. It's hard to feel overwhelmed, have everyone tell you that you're so overwhelmed and not know what to do with any of it. Here's another one. It's easy, hard, are at war. It's been easier to explore new things that I had been meaning to get to but couldn't, like the free course or working on uh, learning a language. Are you learning how to do Sanskrit with a twig from your backyard, Steph? Just out of curiosity, are you an overachiever?
No, not quite Sanskrit, but I've been meaning to brush up on my Spanish for a very long time, and oh gosh, what is it called? The free language app has been great, but yeah, it's been hard to, without having my normal routine, which is my hard part, without having that normal routine that's normally dependent on me coming to and from home.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I like without being able to block out time for it, I end up not doing it more often than what I was hoping I could, just because I forget to make the time, or I don't know when is a good time. So then it ends up just like me sitting on my couch watching TV.
Yeah. Time is also really weird, right? Like somehow it's already Friday, and I literally on Sunday was like, I'll be back in 2 minutes, right? Like, and Sunday is now somehow 2 days away. Anu is learning Sanskrit, congratulations, and said not doing so well. I'm learning how to make bread, and my standard is if my dogs will eat it, that's good enough, right? Like, sounds great. Okay, what about next and promise? Any like next declarations or any promise proclamations anybody needs to say or do? Duolingo. Babbel is also a language app I've heard about. So, Beverly, are you doing your own nails and hair?
Yes, I am. My mother was a hairdresser, so I'm fortunate in that way that
Oh,
I
can I
can
come
do my
over?
hair. Yes, and I've been giving tips to people. I don't know why they're asking me, but
Because you know how to
people have
do the
started.
impossible.
They've started asking. I'm like, you think? Well, I do know, and I didn't even realize I had that skill. But yeah, I do my own hair and I do my own nails and stuff. But I need to do them. I just haven't done them.
Hmm. I've been shaving my head in the backyard and trying to like make that okay because I'm helping birds make nests or something maybe. And then I have the ugly kind of gray hair, which welcome to judgments. What is ugly gray hair? But it looks like a gerbil on a bad day. So then I got tired of that, so I bleached it.
We could take care of that.
So well, I appreciate that. Luckily, my hairstylist has created some situation where like one person per week can come in safely. So I'm going in July 20th. So don't look until then. Great. I'm not seeing any next in promises, so it's not. Oh, here we go. Thank you, Barbara. It's not a competition, but I just like to give people the space. So Barbara says next is to take my puppies for rides and walks. Not a promise because I have to take them to the vet again. Next promise 2 boxes feels like a farce. It's like another thing to fail at. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, but it doesn't have to be huge. Like you don't have to like next gingerbread, right? Like next can be clean pants. That could be a thing, right? Or like next you're going to like next time you're frustrated playing a board game with your kid, you're going to like remember that like this is a great opportunity to be able to do this. And I do not have any children, you're welcome. But a lot of my friends are talking about how as frustrated as they can get with their children, they also know that it's such a rare experience in the way the United States culture is set up to get to spend this much time with your kids at whatever age they're at. Um, and that comment has come out a lot around next. Whether it is the one participant last week is actually on maternity leave, and she's like, it doesn't count as maternity leave if people all emailing me. But she's literally trying to keep a living creature from not like rolling off of a surface. And that amount of stress I could never handle. And also has a 13-year-old who's going through all of the hormones and has fallen in love on Snapchat for the very first time. That's quite the dichotomy, but like she's getting that 24/7 instead of like whatever occasional kind of thing would happen if she had to go back to work, right? Like had to leave or something. So there are moments in kind of reframes, and I don't think you have to stay in reframe. I think you just have to kind of remind yourself. Showering is a big deal. It is. It's a very big deal. Um, Mine are about balancing head planning, component of self, and heart feeling, part of self. Most is trying to make space for my heart. Excellent. Um, we'll be talking a little bit about my model that is head, heart, and action as we kind of move into some of the other workshops. And the way that I use heart or feeling pieces is that they're actually generally appropriate for the scenario. So I use the feelings still as kind of a heady place, whereas the hearty place to me is a connection to something significantly bigger or larger than you, right? So feeling overwhelm is kind of where you're at in the moment, and maybe that's an emotionally appropriate place to be. But like experiencing compassion for people you've never even met, to me, that's like the heart place. So I don't know if that kind of helps frame that a little bit. Keep FaceTiming with your mom regularly. Good job, Lucy. It's hard watching people walk their dogs, and the dog is probably wish their owner would go to work so that they could tear the house up. I'm pretty sure we have interrupted a pretty significant poker tournament in our house because there are definitely days where the dogs are like, nope, still here. But we bought them new toys, so no revolt. Um, we are at the top of the hour, so I want to be mindful of that and your time. We are going to be spending a lot of time together over the next couple of weeks, and I'm really honored and excited about that. If you have any thoughts or comments as we go along, please feel free to text message 202 670 4262 as we go along. And I really think that this will be a very interesting time to be doing all of this, and I'm excited to work with your team. And the mail has come. Welcome to my dogs. So thank you very much, y'all.
Thank you, Jess.
Thanks.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
You're welcome.
See you next week, Monday.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
See you
you.
you. See you
Monday.
next week.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Okay. Bye, everybody.